Bernadette Wilkins, President and General Counsel of Wired Broadband, Inc., a nonprofit advocating for wired solutions to broadband connectivity. I'm also Chair and General Counsel of the National Call for Safe Technology, a coalition of over 100 organizations, community groups, and individuals advocating for safe and wired broadband technology. We are delighted to hear from Eric Windheim in this presentation on the benefits of wired broadband connectivity and what to look out for regarding electromagnetic fields, or EMFs. Eric Windheim is the founder of Windheim EMF Solutions in Sacramento, California. Eric is a certified building biology ecology consultant and electromagnetic radiation specialist. He is also a graduate of the Radio Frequency Safety Officer course, which is accredited by the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, or IEEE. Eric has 10 years of experience detecting, measuring, and reducing EMF exposures for his clients. Eric has evaluated and recommended remedial measures in over 1,100 residential, business, and commercial buildings in 12 states. Eric conducts comprehensive examinations of electric fields, magnetic fields, dirty electricity, and electromagnetic frequencies using a wide spectrum of specialized professional-grade equipment. He works in Sacramento, California, and in surrounding areas. He also travels out of state for special projects. Welcome, Eric Windheim.
Thank you, Odette. It's a pleasure to be here and share with people a little bit more about the hazards of small cells, cell antennas, wireless radiation, because most people love it so much they're not aware of the downside. And yes, I have really enjoyed my entrance into and time with the Building Biology Institute. It's really wonderful to help people by just removing something from their life, like excess radiation. And in some cases, all I do is turn something off, and somebody from the next room comes in and says, "Oh my gosh, the pressure in my head just stopped. What's going on in here?" So it's very rewarding to see that kind of literally instant relief in some people, particularly autistic children. So we're going to those are my certifications. In case you want to go back and read anything in detail, you can just reread this over. But the one on the right is particularly interesting, the IEEE RFSO, Radio Frequency Safety Officer course. That one's really interesting. That espouses the doctrine and dogma of the FCC, and it shows their constructed belief that the only way you can be hurt from wireless radiation is by heating, core body heating, and that there's no such thing as neurological problems at all. If you aren't being heated, you can't be harmed. And it was very, very enlightening to go to that class and hear how they were instructing people how to falsely believe. So this is a diagram of a cell tower. Cell towers can be as low as a lamp pole, and those are called small cells. And sadly, those are popping up in front of second-story bedroom windows all over America. But the cell antenna has a transceiver on the top of a pole, and it's a transmitter and a receiver all in one. And all day long, all day, all week, all month, it sends out radiation for people that have cell phones and other wireless devices. And it's always on. It never takes a break. Sometimes it's more powerful, sometimes it's less. But it's up there sending out a plume in all directions, kind of like a giant agricultural watering sprinkler. Now, the main beam is actually tilted down a little bit so that it hits the earth out there about 150 or 300 feet out, And that can be more powerful out there than right below the antenna. But I want to point out that the FCC testing, their reports normally measure down right at the base of the antenna and not out where the beam is hitting the ground a couple hundred feet out. So it's really kind of interesting. But basically, the cell tower is the backbone of wireless communication. Here's a real life situation in Sacramento, California. The yellow arrow is pointing at a second-story bedroom window with two little girls in there, 3 years old and 5 years old, Hope and Abigail. They were doing just fine until suddenly they both started getting all kinds of sickness, pain, suffering, insomnia. Excuse me. Agitation, anxiety, irritability. And then looked up at the pole and they said, "What is that big gray thing up on the pole?" Well, that's a small cell antenna from Verizon. It's only 60 feet away as measured with the laser rangefinder. And inside the open bedroom window, I measured the highest wireless radiation level I've ever measured inside a home, which was 460,000 microwatts per meter squared. So look at the two little bubbles down on the sidewalk. We're only getting 55,000 and 82,000 compared to 460,000 up at the window. So that family was very disturbed. They actually, at their own expense, hired a professional engineer to explain to them a little bit more about how this thing on the pole was reaching out and touching them. And what you have there is a slight down tilt of that green plume. And the engineer company said that it was 5% of the MPE, maximum permissible exposure. Well, that's pretty close. So what I measured at the window of the home is 4.6%. So that's pretty close. And on the bed pillow, 1.8%. So if we're only 4.6 and 1.8% of what the FCC allows, why did this bedroom end up empty? Why did they have to hunker down and live at the other end of the house to avoid pain and suffering? That's interesting, isn't it? Well, it's because the measurements are so high. What we're measuring, here's what the FCC shows that the risk in these bedrooms is very, very fractional. But as from the building biology viewpoint, it's 13 to 460 times above the extreme concern level. So obviously there's a huge universe of difference between what the FCC says is a danger and what peer-reviewed reports from every country in the world say. And by the way, it doesn't matter what country, what nationality, what genetics, everybody reports the same constellation of pain, suffering, injury, and even death. Now, what we have here is, it's similar to a seismograph chart. From left to right, we're measuring time. It's called a data log. Left to right is time. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Up and down is power level. And this is the antenna, which is right outside the bedroom window of this girl's home. And you can see it goes up and down. And if you look carefully at about 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, there's an abrupt drop right there. That's because the telecom drops the power. They figure, there's not much going on, so we might as well save a little electricity. And then at 3 a.m., they bump it back up. And surprisingly, the hot spot of this period of time was 9:20 on Sunday evening. That seems to be a hot time for people using cell phones. So here's one of the little girls down at City Hall talking to the mayor and city council and saying, "Would you please move this antenna away from my second-story bedroom window?" And this family went down there time after time with lots of people all wearing red T-shirts. So, what happened? They turned in sworn declarations of harm and injury, the mom, the dad, the children, even the uncle, and the grandparents that came to visit. Everybody was getting a whole variety of pain and suffering just being on the premises at this house. And since it's public record, you can actually look it up at the city of Sacramento. So the Federal Communication Commission has ruling law over wireless radiation exposure limits, and it's all based on heating. And here's what they say, quote, "There is no possibility of any danger until the core body temperature increases more than 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit." You know, what's interesting about that, that is the same temperature designation that the American Medical Association calls a slight fever. So in other words, you have to have the equivalent of a slight fever before you can be harmed. Now, the FCC also says there's no replicated study has ever indicated any adverse effects without a measurable increase in tissue temperature. So here's the big thing. They say you've got to be heated, you've got to be cooked before you can be harmed, but they completely ignore all of the neurobehavioral symptoms that are not considered adverse. All the headache, the fatigue, the sleep disruption, discomfort, difficulty concentration, depression, and memory loss. They don't consider neurological or non-thermal. None of the people that are injured by cell tower radiation report heating, burns, or shock. So that's what the FCC says is a sign of damage: heating, burns, or shock. And the people that report injury from cell towers or small cells, it's way less, like 1.5% or 2% or 3% of what the FCC allows. In fact, here's the sampling. This is a study done in France back in 2002 by Santini. And what you can see is a huge list of symptoms. And then from here on this axis, we have distance from the cell tower antenna: 0, 10 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards. And what we do see is the further you get away, the lower intensity the symptoms are. And the closer you get to the antenna, the more different kinds of symptoms you have. So the general takeaway is here: close is very bad and further away is less bad. So what did the city of Sacramento do to help this family and this little girl out and the little girl's sister? Well, they hired 2 industry insiders and paid them $61,000 total to write up some very voluminous reports that are about as easy to read as the backside of a life insurance policy. And these reports absolutely declare that these antennas are operating at a mere fraction of what the FCC allows. So there's no cause for alarm whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. Basically a whitewash. So, you know, what can happen to your lovely home? Home sweet home? Well, maybe, until a cell antenna pops up nearby, because if you can see a cell antenna as you walk around the house, the National Board of Realtors said there's at least a 20% reduction in sale price. People just go, oh, wow. I don't like that anymore. I like a big high-powered transmission line. So you could buy a house at $630,000. Bingo. And the cell tower goes up after you moved in. It's worth $125,000 less. I mean, you could be upside down on your mortgage. How's that? Does that feel comfortable? Is that okay with you? Would you want that to happen to you? Okay, so these wireless transmission telecommunication facilities, let's just call them WTFs, of any size, are allowed only in commercial and industrial zones with additional restrictive small cell application requirements in these cities. So these cities have helped their city government write ordinances that said, look, we only want them in industrial areas. We don't want them in residential areas. That makes sense, right? So these people, they went the extra mile and they actually worked with the city council and said, yeah, we all need wireless telecommunication, but not right outside my bedroom window, at my child's school, at the nursing home, at the hospital. So there's other cities in California that say that the place for the tower is in the least preferred location on a list of zones. And that's kind of a strategic error, because the telecoms, they'll try to say nothing's going to work except this location right here in the middle of this public park. Well, city of Fairfax, Malibu, Encinitas, Monterey, Santa Rosa, San Anselmo, they've all got some kind of ordinance. And some ordinances are good, some are weak, and some are very good, very, very good. So, it's interesting that the hazard and nuisance label, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, classifies cell towers as a hazard and nuisance. And you have to declare it by law when you sell your house. So, hey, wait a minute. We've been hearing how safe these things are. Now, why do you have to declare it as a nuisance? Cha-ching. Here's the California Association of Real Estate Transfer Disclosure Statement. It's a legal document, and you have to declare things like construction, air conditioning, air compressors, sewage treatment plants, power lines, airports, cell towers. They're all considered a nuisance or other problem. So if it's so safe, how come you have to declare it as a nuisance? Can you see the problem here? There's a huge dichotomy of thought about these things. But here's the real problem. Everybody loves it. Point-to-point communication without a wire. You put a phone in your pocket or in your purse. Hey, people can get a hold of you everywhere. And the location for the antenna is determined by the viability that the telecom decides. If there's high demand, they'll put up a tower. In fact, they're not just satisfied with voice, text, FaceTime, or even video. They have great plans to connect everything and everybody with wireless radiation. It's called the Internet of Things. Your alarm clock will have an Internet IT address. The cows in the fields will have IP addresses. Trucks, buses, products, a pair of socks. It's all going to have an IP address. Oh, and the surveillance. There's a lot of parts of government that are just going to love the surveillance aspect of this. Is that okay? Is that the world you want to live in for you and your children? So why do we need all these new small cells? Well, see, the big macro towers that are 100 or 200 feet high, they did a great job for a long time, but now we have so many people using tablets, everything. Excuse me. Got a little bit of a bug on my last assessment up in Montana. So the big macro towers have been overloaded, and now we need more small cells on lamp poles, on top of a building, on top of a small building, even on people's rooftops, to be able to have more places to dispense the radiation. So we've already got coverage almost everywhere, thanks to the macro towers. And then we started to put up a couple small regional towers. But if we really want to deliver as much radiation as fast as everybody wants it, we're going to need, if we want to have a chicken in every pot, we're going to need to have an antenna on every pole, or maybe every other pole, every 300 to 600 feet. How do you feel about that? Is that something you want on a pole right outside your house? So let's take a look at the proliferation of cell towers. So back here in 1996, you can barely see any indication of cell antennas, even though there were 17,000 of them in the United States. And then fast forward 10 years, and we have, whoa, 12 times more cell antennas in the United States. And then we move up here to 2016, and we can see it looks like an outbreak of a super virus. There's almost no place where you can go where you can't get reception and high-speed reception at that. So with 5G coming in now and 6G being talked about, and more people using more and more wireless devices, how many more are we going to need? We're going to need about 13 million more antennas by 2025. And they'll be every 300 to 600 feet on power poles, maybe in front of your house. Is that okay with you? 4G, 5G, next G. The G doesn't refer to a frequency. It refers to a generation of technology and a marketing package. So there's small cells, they're on lamp poles and power lines, cell antennas, they can be on rooftops. And then there's the classic macro cell antenna, which is a big thing it's hard to miss. For example, the ones on the left, these are macro towers, and there is one of them in my zip code. They're stark, they're ugly, and they're very powerful. In fact, this one here actually caused one of my clients to have so much loss of sleep that she couldn't do her job and got fired as a school teacher for the Elk Grove School District. Yes, that's correct. Now, this one in the middle, this is a stealth antenna of less than 200 feet is called an antenna. Over 200 feet is called a tower. So it's supposed to look like a pine tree. But the sad thing is about 150 feet over to the right of this antenna is a 4-story apartment complex. And I wanted to get over there and take some measurements because those people are eyeball to eyeball, and this is a very powerful tower here. So over here on the right, you know, I call it junk on a stick. These are all the different antennas that they're now hanging on public lamps. I mean, it's really sad. We have all of these different antennas showing up on lamp poles. And on the left, there's another small cell. They come in all kinds of different shapes. In the middle, there's another one. These are the 5G 28 gigahertz millimeter wave antennas that were installed in my neighborhood, right around the corner, actually. But you know what's interesting? Although I got a special meter to measure that, the millimeter wave 5G, it won't even go through one tree. It won't even go through one window. It won't even go through the wall of your house. It's a big failure. It's too small of a frequency. Although it's fast, it's easily stopped. But they've made a new version of 5G. It has a lower frequency that penetrates a lot better. Plus, they made the antenna steerable, kind of like a searchlight, up, down, left, and right. And it has an adjustable gain antenna. That means they can pump up the volume, or it's like stepping on the gas of your car. They can steer it and increase the power as required to get to the person who's requesting the information. How do you feel about that? Well, everybody's getting into the act, and these are called stranded antennas or hung. They're hung on cables between telephone poles or utility poles, and it really is quite trashy, but that's helping them get the 4G and the 5G radiation out in all kinds of places with lots of delivery rate so that people can watch whatever they want on their handheld mobile device. And even Comcast is putting these things in that look like upside down loaves of bread. They don't want to be left out, so they're making a countywide network of super powerful Wi-Fi. So this could be your neighborhood in the future. Are you okay with having powerful 4G, 5G antennas every other house? You know, this is going to mean a lot of corporate profit. So if you own the stock in these things, you could be on the winning side of everything. But it's also going to be a huge property devaluation. All these homeowners are going to say, hey, guess what? Our house isn't worth as much as we paid for it. And then, the city's going to wake up and say, wait, hey, we're getting less tax revenue because the tax is based on property value. And people are saying our property isn't worth as much as it used to be. So we demand that you reassess our property because of that antenna you got on the pole out there. And it's going to mean a lot of radiation exposure, health damage, and there's going to be social and medical costs. So is all of that worth it? Think about that for a minute. So the question is, who will you trust and what is at stake? Your property value? Your personal health and well-being? Your medical expenses? Your mental performance that allows you to work at your career so that you can have an income that's stable to support a family and your mortgage payments. And of course, you want to be in your right mind and feel calm and relaxed in the comfort of your own home, which is your castle, so that your family relationships can grow and nurture. So we're going to sum up the radiation and your health. There are thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed studies that shows that there's all kinds of damage at levels 1,000 times lower than what the FCC says is safe. So on the right side, the FCC exposure standard says it is intended to protect against established adverse effects to human health. And by the way, they say there's only 4 established adverse health effects. Isn't that interesting? They say it's painful electrostimulation or muscular contraction. Many of you may remember the movie Frankenstein, where they put enough voltage through a dead body and it started to jerk around. That's electrostimulation and muscular contraction. So that's too much radiation. And then they say shocks or burns are adverse, heating pain and tissue burns, and heat exhaustion or thirst. But they forget that nobody complains about what they say is damaging. They all talk about these non-thermal problems. The other problem is the radio frequency radiation reduces your body's ability to secrete melatonin from the pineal gland in the middle of your brain. And if you don't secrete melatonin, you don't rest, you don't repair, you don't feel fully charged in the morning. You feel like a battery that still needs a charge. And melatonin, according to the American Medical Association, that's right, the AMA, they say that melatonin is an oncostatic agent. That means cancer-stopping agent. So how do you feel about having the telecom radiate you in radiation and reduce the amount of cancer-stopping agent that your pineal gland secretes? Are you okay with that? I mean, are you interested in having them interrupt your daily sleep cycle, which is your master antioxidant? I want you to think about that. And then on the left, we have the curve of childhood leukemia over at the Vatican radio tower. So at 1 kilometer or 0.6 of a mile away from the antenna, the occurrence of childhood leukemia is 6 times as high as the national average. And it's not till you get out to about 7, 8 miles that the childhood leukemia rate drops off. Now, over on the right side at Belo Horizonte, Brazil, they found out that the cancer death rate is much, much higher close to the antenna at 100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards, 400, 500, 600. It's not until you get out to about 700 yards that the cancer death rate tapers off. And once again, these are peer-reviewed studies from all over the world. What's also interesting is just common everyday ham radio operators have a much higher cancer incidence. So who would have ever thought about just common radio antennas? Hey, it's all wireless radiation. Same with the Polish military, same with the Korean War veterans, high radar exposure, high cancer exposure. Same in the US Air Force. Oh, and then this is a lovely Mediterranean city in Israel, Netanya, and they found out that the breast cancer rate is like 3-4 times higher near the tower than away from the tower. This is the city as a whole, far.
Eric? Eric, we can't hear you.
Yeah, it's everywhere you go around the world, you find out that people are being harmed at a fraction of like 5% or less of what the FCC allows. Now, here's one of my favorite studies. In this case, the people were really hurting in Japan, by the way, and they got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And this whole condo apartment building, they said, we want to get rid of that contraption on the roof because we know that's what's causing the problem. So this is the before and after reduction of symptoms. You get like about a 93% reduction in symptoms after you remove the antenna. First one and then the other. Wow. You know, what would third graders say about this? Do you think they know enough to say that antennas are bad, far away is better than close, and it's better to have it removed than install one? I mean, what kind of a message do we need to have here? But the important thing is you don't want this to happen, and it can happen to you unless you work with your county or your city to work on an ordinance that prevents them from putting in residential areas. You don't want to have this happen to you. So remember, there's a number of cities already out there that have gone the extra mile to create some sort of workable ordinance to protect themselves. And for the people in West Marin County, you deserve one now. In fact, every county in America needs to take a stand unless you want to have your property values developed, if you want to have severe health problems, including cancer and death, and loss of real estate. So here's the big problem. The FCC is controlled by industry. We have industry insiders at the head of the FCC from top to bottom, year after year. It's a classic case of the fox guarding the henhouse. And on the left, Norman Allister from Harvard University, he wrote a 60-page magazine on how the FCC is a captured industry in a classic definition. So here's the basics of what you need for a workable ordinance. You need to protect your property value and family health. You need to hire a specialized and successful attorney. You need to develop a workable ordinance, assist local ordinances, don't fight them, help them do their job, which is to protect the general welfare of the people and promote commerce. They're supposed to protect you, not be buddies with the telecoms. And you have to provide broad community support. So hopefully this video will find its way out and people will look at it over and over and talk to a good, knowledgeable attorney to work out an ordinance for their little town, city, or county. Now is the time, because once these telecoms get a permit on the drawing boards, it's too late. You have to educate the county, the city, to tell the telecom what's allowed and what isn't allowed. You don't want to step in halfway through the fight. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. If you want to contact me, you can go to my website, Windheim EMF Solutions. There's a contact form. And once again, I just want to ask you, who are you going to trust and what's at stake? And what are you willing to do to ensure that you don't end up with one of these real close to your house, irradiating your bedroom? Thank you for watching. I appreciate your attention today.
Well, thank you very much.